So, as I say, this war has these three partitions. Desert Shield is the protection part. And this is basically a 3-month-long massing of forces because it takes a long time to get 500,000 people, 500,000 soldiers into a desert. You got to get them mobilized. I mean, look how long it took us to, get things mobilized for COVID. Holy crap. And ironically, I should say, that was local, that was native. Like we were doing things here. We didn't have to truck people all over the world. But the U.S. masses their forces alone, and really you have to pay attention to these numbers. The U.S. forces alone are incredible. The U.S. put more forces, as many possible forces in the field as they legally could. That is, the Congress allows, if you've got a declaration of war, allows for a certain number of soldiers to be in the field. In this case, 540,000. So 540,000, 540,000. That's the limit. You can't get, if you're going to do more than that, you got to go back to Congress and say we need more guys or people, and Congress is going to go, really? That's pretty much the entire standing army. I mean, that's everybody. You're calling everybody out. Everybody's there. You just everybody on the field. Nobody's staying behind. Meanwhile, in the Gulf itself, because you can get at, how do you get to Saudi Arabia? Well, you by ship, mostly, because if you have to get people there urgently, you go by plane. But you can't. It's hard to take 500,000 people. Remember, this is 500,000 soldiers. For the 500,000 soldiers, you need another 3 to 5 million people who are going to support them, who are going to bring fuel, food, do logistics, truck people around, make sure that there's enough medical, all that stuff, material, right? You've got to get everybody everybody has to be on the field, and everybody has to have enough food to eat, enough water to drink. If they get sick, they got to have that. They got to have. Basically, you're moving a whole community into the desert. Which desert? Well, the Saudi Arabian desert, because the Saudis are like, yeah, we'll make a deal with you, sure. So you want to be along the border with Iraq? Okay, yeah, we're not fond of Iraq. What's in it for us? So they start to cut deals. But meanwhile, you also want to be able to use Saudi and Kuwaiti littoral space. The littoral is the area along the shoreline. And the job of the Navy is in part to fight from littorals. That's why the guns are so massive. If you see those big guns on say, a destroyer or something like that, the guns are huge because they have to be able to throw a shell 30 miles, and because you got to be able to they got to be able to fire on shore. They also fire missiles and so on, and that's why you have aircraft carrier. Well, that's got to go park somewhere. They've all got to park in the bay, right? So you have to have access to water space as well. And you have access to airspace, so you need to have permission to overfly. They're going to overfly Saudi Arabia. Well, Saudi Arabia has its own air force. So they're like, what are you doing in our airspace? You're like, well, remember we made a deal with you? Oh yeah, that's right. Fly on. So the United States put, over the course of 3 months, 540,000 troops on the ground in Saudi Arabia. 6 aircraft carrier battle groups, which are now known as CSGs, carrier strike groups. And this includes the carrier itself, and these are like floating cities. I mean, you've seen them, right? There was a fire on one of the carriers in San Diego Harbor, I think it was, this last week. And it took them 3 days just to cool the fire off enough so that the firefighters could get near it. They had to cool off that. They spent the first day just cooling the ship down so that the gas tanks didn't blow, because the fuel reserves, I mean, you can imagine the size of the gas tanks on these tankers, these freighters, these aircraft carriers. They are massive. If one of those went up, it'd take out the whole city. So they're like, okay, cool it. So literally, so they spent the whole day pouring water on the tanks just to cool them. So these aircraft carrier battle groups have the carrier itself, plus a half a dozen warships around them, including missile ships. So you've got 36 battleships, basically. They're sitting in the harbor, right, or sitting in the Persian Gulf. You've got 2,200 tanks, and these are big tanks. These main battle tanks are basically 70 tons. and they have their guns are 100 millimeter guns, so 10 centimeters, right? They can fire shells that are 10 centimeters in diameter. You've got 500 combat helicopters and 1,500 combat aircraft. So you brought everything you've got, pretty much. The only thing you're not using is poison gas and nuclear weapons, right? But you're pretty much using everything else you want to use. And then you add in the Allies, because this is just the Americans, right? That's what the Americans brought to the table, right? But what did the Allies bring? What did they bring to the party? Well, the Allies, because it was a coalition, join in. And by the time they join in, you've got about 700,000 troops on the ground. So it is 0.7 of a million, right? 0.7 million troops on the ground. Okay? So let me show you a slide here of what the attack looks like. And you'll see that this is the sort of slide of the famous, what is called the famous Hail Mary attack, where you can see that all the forces that are arrayed all along the border, and they all the little basically distinctive unit identities. You can see the different units, American units, and then you'll see flags that are posted just sort of like for whole countries. Here's the French, and here are the British, and here are the okay. And yeah, it's amazing. I'm interested to see this because they really are clear about. You can see what they did with the French. Like, okay, you go up north there, like get out of our way. Whereas the British, they put right into the middle of the fight. So it's very interesting. But anyway, so when we look at the Powell Doctrine, the reason I'm showing you this battle map, I'm not a big one for battle maps, but this is an example of what the Powell Doctrine looks like. This is what overwhelming force is. You basically are going to line up everybody and then sit there for 3 months, right? And then you roll. And at the point that you roll, it's so comprehensive. The thing has been so highly planned that there is going to be no mistake about what is going to happen. This is not going to be Vietnam. And so although Iraq had a powerful military, and it did have a powerful military, because that's what Saddam had bought, it was no match for this. Really, very few things were matched for this. Maybe the Russians, although the Russians had given Saddam its tanks. I mean, they gave them T-72s, which were the contemporary main battle tank for the Russians. They were massively outgunned. Because this was always the thinking. It's like, what if the Allies had to go up against the Russians in what was called the Warsaw Pact battle, and which was this sort of the group of the Allies that fought in World War II. What if they had to fight the communist Russians? And the feeling was that it would be this kind of army, everybody had, basically. So at the point of the army's mass, it's still Desert Shield, because you're protecting the explanation that's given out is that you're shielding Saudi Arabia and Israel, right? Don't forget, right? And then this becomes Desert Storm. So when they say, okay, that's it, roll, they roll across the berms, because there are these big sand berms. They're essentially are natural bunkers, and also bunkers that they build. In Saudi Arabia, they go over these bunkers, and that's it. The war is on, and they roll into Iraq. And at the point that happens, it switches from Desert Shield to Desert Storm, sometimes called Desert Saber, which is the ground attack. But nobody really remembers that because, their Desert Storm sounds good. That's fine. Desert Saber, who talks about that? Army junkies do. And meanwhile, there are 70,000 bombing sorties are flown uncontested after a few days. And in the first couple of days, the Iraqi Air Force is still fighting. They're still they're buzzing around. Then they all get shot down or they give up. They fly their planes somewhere else and turn their planes over because they can see it's going to be a slaughter. They're like, And by February 24th, 100 hours after the coalition rolls into Iraq, it's over. 100 hours, right? Not even 5 days. I just have to emphasize, it's 100 hours. Okay. I mean, you've probably gone away on vacation for 100 hours. 100 hours, that's all. After 25 years in Vietnam. Okay, you gotta keep this calculus in mind, because it is going to be crucial. On the coalition side, there are total, taking all the armies, all the militaries, 300 troop deaths. Not all of those are American. 300 deaths. And you've got some 700,000 people on the ground, men, women, and in the air, and at sea. On the Iraq side, well, we don't know, as always, right? Because they lost. So, although the Vietnamese won, and we still don't know, right? Because they were just such a slaughter. But the estimates range between 30,000 and 50,000, but not less. I haven't seen an estimate of less than that. And any number of civilians we don't know. Again, civilian deaths, interestingly enough, it isn't until the long wars, as they're called, the forever wars or the long wars, but really the long wars is really it, in Iraq, that they began counting civilian deaths actually one by one. I mean, these various different, the Casualties Project, casualtiesofwar.org, National Priorities Project began actually counting deaths. But Casualties of War, I think it's still casualtiesofwar.org, I'll post that, was still keeping a track of exactly how many people were dying and who they were, because they were like, never again will we go through this. But Americans and Canadians weren't concerned really about those deaths at all. I mean, they just didn't care. Well, when brown, non-Christian poor people 10,000 miles away die, North Americans generally don't care. I mean, they're like, oh my goodness, that's a shame. But especially if they deem those people to be others. So let's just take a quick look at a propaganda issue here. So let me just stop this.